Hi folks, welcome to my week in science fiction. As usual, let's start with what I've been reading. It's been a pretty good week. I'm making good headway with my deliberately lighter reads that I've chosen for this month. Last weekend I finished Bearhead by Adrien Tchaikovsky. It's a loosely connected sequel to Dogs of War, which was an excellent book. I do think that Bearhead could be read on its own. The stories are quite different and they're separated by over 30 years, and just having one or two characters and references in common. So, Bearhead. Jimmy is minding his own business, a lazy technician on Mars, a worker bee in a giant effort to make a Martian crater habitable for thousands of wealthy clients. He's also an addict and he's out of money, so he visits Sugar, a black market operator. Each of the workers on Mars has some digital storage built into their brains, and plenty of it, a surprisingly, even suspiciously large amount of it, it turns out. And he's paid to temporarily store a large digital file in his head, no reasons given or asked for. Shortly afterwards, his brain starts talking to him, giving poor Jimmy quite a shock. And that voice is a digital copy of Honey, an 8-foot bioform, a bear, who, by the way, was the best character in Dogs of War. Why she's on Mars, and why in Jimmy's head in particular, we don't know, and neither does Honey, or not yet. Back on Earth, we're introduced to a slimy politician, Warner S. Thompson, who is vying for a seat on the World Senate. He's a rather transparently Trumpian sort of character. He talks in word salad, incomplete sentences, and yet somehow is getting across his angry message to the masses. His assistant, Carol Springer, is super willing to do whatever it takes to make him successful, whatever it takes. And it gradually becomes clear through the book that this is not a voluntary arrangement, and why. In contrast to Dogs of War, which ends in an outpouring of sympathy for the bioforms, with human rights accorded to them for the first time, 30 years later, in Bearhead, sentiment has changed and bioforms are blamed and feared in much the same way as immigrants today. Some bioforms, mainly the dogs, willingly submit to controls, a collar with a capital C, which they see as only fitting for their status as friends and willing servants of humanity. But many bioforms do not subscribe to this point of view. Bearhead is a story of be careful what you wish for, as some powerful people seek to apply similar controls to humans, both on Earth and on Mars, for their own greed and security. There are wheels within wheels, dirty tricks, a certain amount of very deserved comeuppance, distributed intelligences, both human and bioform, and eventually individuals, human and bioforms both, having to decide which side of the bread their butter is on, picking sides. I enjoyed Thompson, the slimy politician. He was thoroughly objectionable, and Honey I thought was great again, even though she was in digital form this time. I do think Bearhead is well worth your time if you haven't read it, although perhaps less satisfying than Dogs of War, which I would definitely read first, just from an enjoyment point of view. Next, I read On by Adam Roberts, the latest in my journey through his back catalogue. As you'll see, I thought it was great, and I think the highest praise that I can give it is that it seems to be an obvious homage to Christopher Priest's Inverted World. And so much so, in fact, that I think I'll do a separate video at some point in the next week or two, comparing and contrasting the two books. So where are we with On? Ty is an 8-year-old boy nearing adulthood by the reckoning of his people, which in itself is a jarring piece of information. He lives in a small village and his family own 8 goats and are considered rich as a result. And in the first line of the book, one of said goats has fallen off the world. Fallen off the world? What? Ty's village, it transpires, clings to the side of the world wall, which stretches above and below for thousands of miles in each direction. And the loss of the goat has a number of consequences, and ultimately Ty falls off the world as well, which ought to be the end of him and the book too. Unfortunately for all of us, he's afforded a soft landing of sorts and is cared for by Vievra, a doctor of sorts in the Imperial City Army. Ty recovers but is left with a permanent limp, and having survived the fall, he's seen as a good omen by the Imperial Army and is inducted into the Sky Corps, a wing, no pun intended, of the military, the Air Force. Using arm power and a kite arrangement, Ty and his fellow trainees are soon soaring around having a great time. But war is coming and the kite flyers play a key role, Ty and friends soon becoming involved much more directly than they'd envisaged in the combat. I really found the geography of this story fascinating. The world truly is a wall, vertical, with varying degrees of topography along the way, and I found myself continuously having to reorientate myself to properly imagine what was being described to me, and I wondered often whether we were on Earth or somewhere else. And there are numerous clues throughout the book, which heavily hint which it is. In the latter part of the book, Ty is caught up in even stranger events as more and more is revealed about the truth of his world and his place in it. And I shall say no more than that at this point. I really enjoyed On. I like Adam Roberts' writing, and each of the books I've read is quite different in setting and subject matter. And this book messes with your head. It subverts your sense of the normal and the expected, and right from page one, which had me on the back foot in a good way throughout. I recommend it. Next, I read Generation Ship by Michael Mamet. You'll be amazed to know that this story is set on, wait for it, a generation ship. 18,000 people-ish are on board, all descendants of the first crew from 250 years back. The ship is nearing its final destination, and probes are sent to the planet to see what's what. What's the atmosphere like? Can the planet support humans and Earth flora and fauna? Is it dangerous? Is there life already? All of these important questions are vital to the success of the future colony, but the probes are breaking down and they're able to send only limited information before just dying. Sheila Jackson is a scientist, and she's concerned by the breakdowns of the probes and by the limited information that they're getting. But the information they are getting strongly suggests that a cautious approach is essential. But things aren't that simple. Many aboard are feeling the restrictions of shipboard life are unnecessary now that they're nearing their final destination. In particular, there are protests about the compulsory death of everybody once they reach 75 years old. It's essential to keep the population in balance during their long voyage, but they're almost there. Is it really necessary now? The governor, the political leader of the ship, sees an opportunity to distract the populace with a colonization mission over the objections of Sheila and other scientists. This story is really one of politics, power play, side deals, conspiracy, shady black market types, backstabbing, and all of that good stuff. And in amongst that, there are some nice threads. I particularly liked Eddie Danin's thread. She's a generational talent chafing at her boring job in maintenance, and she's a hacker and ultimately becomes key to the story. Despite all of the political shenanigans and manoeuvring, we do eventually get down to the surface of the planet, and I stress eventually. And there follows a rather hurried section where we get to look at the surface and the local wildlife. And the reasons for the probe breakdowns quickly become apparent, and let's just say that humans are less than welcome on this planet. I enjoyed the story overall, but I would have been happier with less politics, I think, and more time on the planet, more time exploring and understanding. And in addition to that, the story ended rather abruptly with what I think was really a bit of a cop-out from a plot point of view. It's almost like he ran out of time or ideas, or was working to a page count budget or something. Overall then, it was a good book, but not a great book. Thank you again to Whitney for plucking this off my Amazon wish list and sending it my way. Very much appreciated. So that's 3 of the modest 7 books from April's TBR knocked off in 1 week, and I've 3 left to read. I am making pretty good progress, and I'll be able to add some books to that pile, I think, to close out the month. Channel stuff next then. Subscribers are at 2,671, which is up 30 on last week. If you're one of those 30, or if this is your first time here, welcome. I'm John, and I focus on reading, collecting, and waffling on about science fiction books. Comment of the week this week was from Chris Spencer, who gave some wise words on J.G. Ballard and the likelihood of me liking any of his work if I hadn't got on with him so far. I have only read 1 book of his, Crash, which I didn't like at all. So I still think I should give Ballard a chance, and I think Chris's suggestion of short stories is a good re-entry point for me. Thank you, Chris, and thanks to all of you that have left comments in the past week. Very much appreciated. Let us take a look at what was on the channel this week. On Sunday, there was a book haul incorporating some lovely books that I got for my birthday, plus a bunch more finds in the wild and some online purchases too. In theory, that will be the last haul for a little while. I'm trying to cut down on the book buying as I have space issues fundamentally. On Tuesday, I did a quick overview of Hyperluminal, a collection of Jim Byrne's beautiful artwork, much of which is featured on science fiction and fantasy book covers. And there are some really lovely pictures in there. It's definitely worth 5 minutes of your time if you haven't watched it already. And on Wednesday, there was another quick video, this time of me putting up some shelves, which is almost as interesting as it sounds. The last, or almost the last, bit of spare wall in my office that was available for shelving has now been covered with shelves and promptly filled, jam-packed with A-format science fiction books. The whole exercise means that my main shelves are less full than they were, and there are no piles of books on the floor anymore, or strictly speaking, not as many piles. There are piles on the floor. I think I will be undertaking some kind of shelf audit in the coming weeks and months. What I've read, what will I never read again, what is yet to be read, and which of those are just never going to grab my attention and are thus just taking up valuable shelf space. We'll see what that exercise yields, but I will at least know how many books I have in my library by the end of it and what percentage of it I am yet to read. Viewing wise, I haven't found the time to watch any more Three Body Problems, so I'm stuck at 2 episodes in at the moment. I will get to it, I enjoyed it. But on this here YouTube, I watched Jonathan, great name by the way, over at Words in Time, who did a spoiler-free look at Disquiet Gods, the recently published 6th book in Christopher Rocchio's Sun Eater series. I have some catching up to do before I can get to that one. I haven't read the 3rd book yet, but it was fun to get a sense of where the story is headed in the long run. I had another look at Grammaticus, who, among other things, did a review of the Anubis Gates by Tim Powers, and I was interested in that because I picked up a copy recently, and one or two of you had said that it was a good book. And I also watched Nikki, the obsessive bookseller, run through some recent reads, and my chief interest there being Howling Dark, which is the 2nd book of the aforementioned Sun Eater series, which I have also finished recently. A fellow recent Sun Eater convert, she also loved it. In keeping with me being on the wagon from a book buying perspective, my acquisitions this week have been modest, although I do seem to have 7 books piled up. Accidentally, you understand. A couple here, a couple there, an online order that I'd forgotten about. They do soon seem to mount up. Looking ahead to the coming week, on Sunday there will be that Sun Eater video that I threatened to do this week, an overview of some kind of Empire of Silence, which was book 1. I have a structure in mind at least now. I just need to put some flesh on the bones, which hopefully I'll get to this weekend. And there will be another quick art book video, this time featuring Chris Foss. That will probably arrive on Tuesday. And then later in the week, perhaps on Thursday, I might make a start on the shelf audit that I mentioned earlier on. It'll soon be a year for me on YouTube, my chaniversary, if you will. And I do need to start thinking about how to mark that occasion, but that will be out nearer the end of the month. Reading wise, I've made a start on Fractal Noise, so I'll burn through that pretty quickly, I think. And then I'll tackle the Cassini division by Ken MacLeod. And I think I'll leave it there for this week. I need to reserve a bit of time for some video planning and production. If you enjoyed this update, then let me point you to something else that you might also like. As always, thank you all for watching and have a great weekend. And until next time, goodbye for now.